Hi guys, welcome to Doctors of Medicine. Today we're going to talk about the topography of the cerebral cortex. So right here, you see this is your brain. So we are seeing another chunk of the hemisphere. So you're going to see that your brain has the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, they're going to be divided by a fissure called a longitudinal fissure. Let's look at another diagram. Right. So this is your longitudinal fissure that divides the cerebral hemisphere into two, your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere. The longitudinal fissure is going to be made by a tendinous sheet that is called falx cerebri. So you're going to have this sheet anteriorly attaching to the crista galli of your ethmoid bone, and then posteriorly is going to attach the internal occipital protuberance. It will be containing the subdural venous sinuses as it will be separating the right hemisphere from the left hemisphere. So if you're going to look at your brain, there are going to be impressions and elevations. Depressions and elevations. Depressions, they are called sulci if there are many. Sulcus if it is one. Elevations are going to be called gyri if there are many, and gyrus if they are one. So what is important is to understand that the brain, the cerebral cortex, or the cerebral part of the brain, is going to be divided into lobes. So the brain is divided into lobes. You have 5 important lobes, and these lobes, they're going to be demarcated by fissures or sulcus. Let's take a look at the lobes of the brain. Right. It's of great importance to understand that the brain is made up of 5 lobes. So you're going to have a central sulcus right here. So the central sulcus is going to be important because it's going to separate the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. So what is anterior to the central sulcus is going to be your frontal lobe. What is posterior to the central sulcus is going to be your parietal lobe. Done. And then you're going to have your temporal lobe being separated from the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe by what you call a lateral sulcus. Right here is your lateral sulcus. So your lateral sulcus will separate your frontal lobe, your parietal lobe from the temporal lobe. Very important. And then posteriorly, about 4 centimeters from the occipital lobe, you're going to have what you call a parietal occipital sulcus right here. So this is your parietal occipital sulcus. It's going to divide the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. So let's try it over again. Right. You have the central sulcus. Anterior to it, the frontal lobe. Posterior to it, the parietal lobe. The lateral sulcus, dividing the parietal lobe from the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. Then 4 centimeters from the occipital lobe, you have above it, you're going to have your parietal occipital sulcus. This sulcus is very important because it demarcates the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. Very important. Right. Then, so we say that we have a longitudinal fissure, right? We also have a transverse fissure right here. So the transverse cerebral fissure, it separates the cerebellum from the cerebral cortex. So it's going to be made by a tendinous sheet again called the tendorium cerebri. So this tendorium cerebri will be attaching mainly to the posterior clinoid processes, right, of the sphenoid bone, and then it will be separating your cerebral cortex from the cerebellum. Right. Right. So each hemisphere is going to have a lateral surface and a medial surface. So the medial surface is the one that we don't see. The lateral surface is the one that we see, right? So in the medial surface, there are structures or impressions and elevations that you're going to see that are from the brain. So you're going to have, we say that we have a longitudinal fissure. That longitudinal fissure is going to be made by falx cerebri. So that falx cerebri is going to be sitting right on a on 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 a ridge that will be connecting your right and left hemisphere, made up of white matter. That is going to be your corpus callosum. So right here, this is your corpus callosum. So corpus callosum, as we're going to talk deep and deep, it is fibers that communicates the left and the right hemisphere. But these are unmyelinated fibers. So this is going to comprise of white matter. Right. So above your corpus callosum, you're going to have a gyri, which is called a cingulate gyri. So here is a cingulate gyri. So your cingulate gyri, it will continue inferiorly to form the para-hippocampal gyri, as we're going to see in another picture. So the cingulate gyri and the para-hippo gyres, these are responsible for the limbic system, which they have to take part in the memory. Everything that has to do with your memory is within the limbic system. You understand? Right. So let's get deep and understand more. Let's take a look at another diagram. Now let's start with the lateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere. Now, we spoke of the central sulcus. So everything that is anterior to the central sulcus is going to be the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is going to have series of gyri and series of sulci, as we're going to see. Then posterior, you're going to have your parietal lobe. And then let me start with I'm done with the central sulcus. Let me go to the lateral sulcus. Right. So the lateral sulcus is going to be made of 3 ramus. You're going to have an anterior ramus, an ascending ramus, and a posterior ramus. So the major part of the lateral sulcus is going to be made by the posterior ramus. It is this posterior ramus that will be dividing mainly the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobe. But these anterior and ascending ramus, they are found on the frontal lobe. They are very important as far as the inferior frontal gyri is concerned, because you're going to see that these anterior rama and ascending rami, they're going to divide the inferior frontal gyri into 3 portions. Let's take a look. Right. So right here, this is your central sulcus, this is your frontal lobe, and then this is your lateral sulcus. So the lateral sulcus is also called the Salvarian fissure, right? It's also called the Salvarian fissure. So we said it is 3 components. It is a posterior ramus, which is the main part, an anterior ramus, and an ascending ramus. The anterior and the ascending ramus, they're going to divide the inferior frontal gyrus into 3. This is your orbicular portion, your triangular portion, and your orbital portion. These are very important because when we're going to do the frontal lobe, we're going to talk about what you call the Broca's area. And the Broca's area is going to be made by the A and the B, which is your orbicular and the triangular. You understand now? Good. So your lateral fissure separates the frontal, the parietal from the temporal. Take note of this. We have also the 5th lobe of the brain, but that lobe cannot be seen from the surface, but rather it has to be reflected by opening the lateral fissure. So when you open the lateral fissure by reflecting the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the temporal lobe, you're going to meet what you call an insula lobe. Let's take a look at the diagram. Right. So we have reflected. So the right here is your temporal lobe. Right here is your parietal lobe. Right here is your frontal lobe. Right here is occipital, your parietal lobe. So we have reflected your frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe have been reflected at the lateral figure. And then we are going to see in another lobe, which is called an insular lobe. An insular lobe. This lobe is very important as far as viscera is concerned. So everything that has to do with the taste, everything that have to do with olfactory processing, everything that have to do with your GIT, your digestion, everything is going to be processed by the insular lobe done. So your insular lobe, it also has a central sulcus. And this central sulcus right here, right? This is your central sulcus right here. And then from the central sulcus, what will be anterior to the central sulcus, you're going to have your short gyri. And what is posterior to the central sulcus of the insula, you're going to have long gyri. And the insular lobe is responsible for visceral, right, and olfactory functions. Done. Now, we are done with the lateral fissure. Let's take a look at the frontal lobe now. So the frontal lobe is what you call a frontal pole, right? And then we are going to have this lobe. This is the largest lobe, and beneath the largest lobe is going to have a frontal lobe, right? And then it will be demarcated from the parietal lobe by the central sulcus. So just anterior to the central sulcus, there's a gyri that you meet. That gyri is going to be called your precentral gyrus. Your precentral gyrus is involved in primary motor cortex. Is the primary motor cortex or the primary motor area that involves all voluntary movements. So all voluntary movements, they are coming or processed by the precentral gyrus, right? So there's gonna be a groove that is parallel to your central sulcus. So this is your central sulcus. Parallel anterior to the central sulcus, a groove that is parallel to it is gonna be your precentral sulcus. So between your precentral sulcus and your central sulcus, you have your precentral gyri. And that precentral gyrus is involved in primary motor cortex, primary motor area, right? And then your frontal lobe is going to have another two sulci, a superior sulci right here and an inferior sulci right here. So the superior and the inferior sulci is going to give us three gyri: a superior frontal gyrus, a mid frontal gyrus, and inferior frontal gyrus. What is important is to mainly understand that the inferior frontal gyri is divided further by the ramus coming from the lateral fissure, which is the ascending ramus and the anterior ramus into A, B, and C. A being your opercular, B being your triangular, C being your orbital. The A and the B of the inferior frontal gyrus will become the Broca's area that is going to be involved in motor speech. Everything that is concerned with your speech comes from your Broca's area, which is your opercular and your triangular. You understand now? So the A and the B, these are your Broca's areas. And the Broca's area is found in the hemisphere of dominancy, which means if you are right-handed like me, where is your Broca's area found? It's going to be found in the left hemisphere. If you are left-handed, your Broca's point is going to be found in the right hemisphere. That's very important to understand. Good. Right. So I am done with the frontal lobe. Let's take a look at the parietal lobe now. So the parietal lobe is going to be posterior to your central sulcus. So posterior to the central sulcus, there's going to be a groove that is going to be parallel to the central sulcus, but posterior to it. That is going to be your post-central sulcus. So between your post-central sulcus and the precentral gyrus, you're going to have your post-central gyrus. This is very important as far as somatosensory is concerned. So that's where you have your sensory homunculus. In the precentral gyrus, you have your motor homunculus. In the postcentral gyrus, you have your somatosensory homunculus. That's where you have your taste, vibration, pain, temperature, touch, sexual pleasure. They are all found at the homunculus of the postcentral gyrus. You understand? That. And then you're also going to have a fissure that is called an intraparietal fissure right here. So your intraparietal fissure will demarcate your parietal lobe into a superior parietal lobe and inferior parietal lobe, just like that. So these lobes, they are going to have different um, different functions. Some of them, they are actually going to have what you call somatosensory association cortex or somatosensory association um, areas that will modify, analyze, and recognize um, your touch, right? So they are mainly used in neurological examination. For example, in neurophysiology, you would understand that it's not enough to sense fine touch, right? You need to recognize the fine touch. If it is an insect that is walking right on your skin, you don't just have to know where it is, but you also have to analyze what is it. So that's where your somatosensory association cortex comes into play. It analyzes and then it recognizes what it is using your previous um, understanding and knowledge. Done. So that's your parietal lobe. Then let's take a look at the temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe is going to be lateral to your lateral fissure. Your temporal lobe also has a temporal pole right here, but it's going to have the two major sulci. It's going to have what you call a superior temporal sulci right here, and then if there's a superior, there's definitely going to be an inferior temporal sulci right here. So these two sulci, they are going to divide the temporal lobe into three, right? So you have your superior temporal gyrus, mid temporal gyrus, and inferior temporal gyrus. What I want you to understand is this: the superior temporal gyrus is also called the it will be continuous. The superior temporal gyrus is continuous with the parietal lobe, a portion in the parietal lobe. That is called an angular gyrus. So you have this portion, this called an angular gyrus, and then this portion of the superior temporal lobe is going to be called your supramarginal gyrus, right? And B, the angular gyrus and the supramarginal gyrus at the end of at the posterior end of the lateral fissure, they are going to communicate. And this end is going to be your wincus area that is going to be involved in language, written, even spoken language is going to be at this area right here. And take note of this: the Broca's area is right here, the wincus area is right here. And the wincus area, it will be communicating a portion of the parietal and portion of the temporal. And that wincus area is found in the dominant hemisphere. So which means if you are right-handed, it's going to be found in the left hemisphere together with the Broca's area. You understand now? Good. So you have your superior temporal gyrus. Mainly the superior temporal gyrus will be involved in it's going to be involved in your in auditory. So is the primary auditory area right here, your primary auditory area. And then you have your mid temporal gyrus. That's going to be your auditory sensor association cortex. And then you also have your inferior temporal gyrus as well, right? Done. Let's take a look at the occipital now. Our occipital is going to be the last. Let's take a look. Right, so looking at the medial surface of this hemisphere, there are certain things that we cannot see from the lateral, right? So I'm going to talk about the occipital lobe, looking for it at this region. So this is your parietal lobe being divided by what you call your parietal occipital sulcus. This is your occipital lobe. Your occipital lobe mainly is going to be formed by your primary visual cortex. So it's going to have mainly um, right. So this is your what? This is your posterior. This is your occipital lobe. Your occipital lobe, a part of it is gonna be involved in primary visual cortex. So as you're gonna do the eye, you're going to understand the eye, that it end up um, um, its sensory cortex is going to be found in the occipital region. That's your occipital cortex. So when you do the pathway of the eye, what we call the visual pathway, so you're going to have your lateral genicular nucleus that will be sending fibers going to your what? Going to this area of the occipital, which is involved in primary visual cortex. But also a portion of it is going to be involved in visual associated what? It's going to be a visual associated cortex as well. So the parietal occipital sulcus, right, is going to extend as what you call a calcarean sulcus right here, right? So this calcarean sulcus is very important because what is anterior and posterior to it is going to be your primary visual cortex. So you have your precuneus and your cuneus. So your precuneus and your cuneus, these are areas that are going to be involved in primary visual cortex. They are gonna be involved in primary visual function. Right. Good. So as we about to end, let me just end by we're going to have a separate video for the medial surface. We're going to talk about the corpus callosum, but just for your sake of understanding, this is the medial portion, right? Right. So in the medial portion, you have what you call a frontal gyrus, and then you're going to have your paracentral lobule, and then you're going to have your precuneus and your cuneus. But what I want you to understand is that you have your corpus callosum right here. The corpus callosum, we say it is fibers that will be communicating the left and the right hemisphere. Above the corpus callosum, you have your cingulate gyri. This cingulate gyri is the one that will extend, right, and also form your parahippocampal gyri. These cingulate gyri, the parahippocampal gyri, they are all going to be involved in the limbic system, right? So as you're gonna look, your corpus callosum right here is gonna be divided into 4 regions. The most posterior region, the thickest, is gonna be called your splenium, right? And then this is gonna be called your trunk. Then this most anterior portion is gonna be called your genu. And then this ventral portion is going to be called your rostrum, right? It's very important as far as motor fibers are concerned, right? So we're going to talk about it in another video, right? So lastly, let me take you through the course of the inferior portion of the frontal lobe. Let's take a look. Right, so this is going to be your temporal lobe. This is your parietal lobe. This is your optic chiasm, right? As we're going to see, we're going to talk about it later. But what is important, if I zoom, I don't know if if you can see clearly, right? So in the inferior lobe, right, in the frontal lobe, at the inferior aspect, you're going to have what you call an olfactory sulcus. An olfactory sulcus. So this olfactory sulcus is going to have your olfactory tract and your olfactory bulb. Olfactory tract and olfactory bulb. The region that is medial of the gyri that is medial to this olfactory sulcus, this gyri, is going to be called your gyri rectus. And then the gyri that is lateral to this sulcus, olfactory sulcus, is going to be your orbital gyri. You understand? So it's also very important to understand these things because as far as olfactory is concerned, it's very important that the olfactory area is going to be perceived in the ancus of the parahippocampus of the parahippocampal gyri, which you say the part of the limbic system. So the limbic system, it has two main functions. It has two main functions, right? One, it is memory function, right? Two, it is olfactory function. Those are the main functions of the limbic system. So true or false, I saw a question that was saying um, all the sensation, the sensory portion, they travel to the thalamus, right? Except the olfactory, because the olfactory, it does not need to go to the thalamus, right? It is just perceived in the uncus or the parahippocampal um, gyri. You understand? So that is everything that I have for you today. We are going to continue with the lecture 2. We're going to talk about the we are going to talk about the cerebral white matter. So today we are talking about the cerebral cortex, and also don't forget to check our neurophysiology lectures so that you may have all this information at once, so that it will be easier to understand. Thank you so much, guys. See you in our another lecture videos. Take care.